Hello and welcome to another History Revision podcast, and this time it's on politics and the economy in 1970 to 74. Let's start off with looking at Edward Heath in opposition before he became Prime Minister. Now, after the 1964 election defeat for the Conservatives, Douglas Hume, who had lost, unexpectedly resigned, and then he changed the rules to allow a ballot to elect the next leader, unlike the selection as it was before. Heath had previously been Shadow Chancellor, and he bid to be leader and was elected leader of the Tories in 1965 after the new voting system selection for Tory leadership, and he was a surprise winner instead of the Foreign Secretary, who was a favourite, Reginald Maudling. Enoch Powell also ran but only got 15 votes. Heath became the youngest leader of the Tory party at the age of 49. He was state educated and he was middle class, and he was supposed to have the tough, bullish qualities of an opposition leader, says Derek Murphy. However, he lost the 1966 leadership election by more than Hume had lost in 64, and his policies for this had been tax reform, competition, trade union reform, more means testing and welfare. All of these were designed to increase competition in the economy to prepare it for EEC entry, of which Heath was a big advocate. These policies would develop further and move steadily to the right over his period of opposition. Eventually they became known as the Selsdon-Mann policies. The party was moving to the right generally, with the popularity of Powell's right-wing proclamations and the formation of the right-wing pressure group, the Monday Club, throughout the 60s and from the early 60s when it was set up, and that had 2,000 members by 1970, the Monday Club. So why did Heath win in 1970? Well, Powell's right-wing views on the free markets and later immigration, despite Powell being sacked after the Rivers of Blood speech from the Shadow Cabinet, Selsdon-Mann policies as well, they were a tough programme, or supposed to be, of economic and industrial reform. Wilson's jibe calling it Selsdon-Mann actually gave it a coherence that it had not had before, and also a bit of a publicity boost. Labour was suffering from the perceived humiliations in the 1960s devaluation crisis and EEC rejection, for example. In places, strife had been abandoned, which made them look weak and unable to control the unions. Wilson himself blamed the weather. So Heath won, and it was the only occasion since 1945 at the time where a working majority government had been replaced by another working majority government. So what were the aims and policies of the Heath government? He was well prepared for government, says Chris Rowe, as he spent time in opposition detailing his policies. He saw himself as a moderniser with a new style of government, similar to what Wilson had said in 1964. However, he believed in one nation Toryism, harmony between the different classes and interest groups, and he wanted to continue the post-war consensus in many respects, but also break from it in other respects. And this was the Selsdon-Mann policies, the tough programme of economic and industrial reform, a return to free enterprise and values of hard work, being tough on the trade unions. He had actually come up with a policy called a fair deal at work during opposition about the trade union movement and how we should deal with it. Selsdon-Mann also said that industry should be independent of government control, no government intervention. And many of these policies were influenced by Keith Joseph, the monetarist. The key feature of Selsdon-Mann was not to impose a wage freeze and not to interfere with any pay settlements. Market forces would be allowed to decide what the wages should be. The DTI, Department of Trade and Industry, was set up and headed by the ex-head of the CBI, John Davies, and he said there was going to be no more support for lame ducks and allowing inefficient companies to go bankrupt. Now, taxes were cut, especially to the wealthy, and radical tax reform was started. They brought in the Local Government Act, both in 72 and 73, which was a sweeping reform of local government structure, and this created the huge metropolitan boroughs. They stopped subsidising house building and increased the council rents, and they continued and extended the rights to buy council houses. These were often obstructed by local Labour government. His policy was also to join the EEC whatever the cost, and the other 6 countries knew that we believe we could not exist outside it. so that we were entering a system of their making and we couldn't change it at such a late point. So what were the problems facing Heath? Well, to start off with, his Chancellor, probably the most able minister, Ian MacLeod, died very soon after the election at a young age. He also had to contend with the Ugandan Asian crisis of 1972, problems in Northern Ireland, and that's especially difficult because he needed the support of the Unionist MPs, which they'd always given the Conservative Party, in the Commons. The 1973 OPEC oil price crisis. The OPEC is the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and they began to take greater control of their oil, which they'd always supplied to the West quite cheaply. And this is in retaliation for Western support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And they raised prices. They also put an embargo on oil to America, but all countries suffered as a result. This led to sharp inflation and a record budget deficit, and also a drop in the value of the pound, which is now post-Bretton Woods Agreement, so it was floating and no official devaluation like 1967 took place. Heath also had to contend with the miners' strikes in 1972 and 74.